Somewhere in the deep past, a frog grew big enough to bite a baby dinosaur in half. A scorpion grew longer than your arm. A penguin grew tall enough to look a grown man dead in the eye. Each one broke a completely different record in a completely different way. All right, let's dive in. Number 10, the rodent that weighed a ton. Let's start with an animal that turns one of your instincts inside out. When you picture a rodent, you picture something small. A mouse you could cup in your hand. A rat. At worst, a beaver. That instinct is about to fail you, because 3 million years ago, in the wetlands of what is now Uruguay, there lived a rodent the size of a bison. Its name is Josephus artiguesia, and it holds the record as the largest rodent that ever existed. We're talking about a guinea pig relative that stood as tall as a person at the shoulder and weighed, by the boldest estimates, close to a ton. Its skull alone was over 1/2 meter long, and out of the front of it grew a pair of incisors like an elephant's tusks, curved and constantly growing. When scientists modeled the force this animal could put through those front teeth, the numbers stopped them cold. Its bite rivaled that of a large crocodile. Think about that mismatch for a second. A plant-eating rodent, an overgrown cousin of the humble capybara, walking around with a bite powerful enough to go toe-to-toe with a crocodile. Researchers think it probably used those tusk-like teeth the way an elephant uses its own, not just for feeding, but for fighting, and for digging, and for fending off the saber-toothed cats and giant terror birds that shared its swamp. I should be honest that the exact weight is argued over. Some estimates put it lighter, closer to 1/2 ton, because we're reconstructing a bison-sized animal from mostly a skull. But even at the low end, nothing in the entire history of rodents comes close. Its closest living relative gives you a sense of the joke evolution was playing. It's a shy, rarely seen rodent from the South American forests called the pacarana, an animal you could hold in your arms. Josephus artiguesia was that, scaled into a monster. This was not a gentle world. It shared its wetlands with ground sloths, armored glyptodonts the size of cars, saber-toothed cats, and terror birds standing taller than a man, flightless predators with axe-like beaks. A slow, tank-like, ton-heavy rodent with a crocodile's bite would have needed every bit of that armament just to survive the neighborhood. The animal was named after a Uruguayan national hero, and it was described in 2008 from that single, remarkable skull. When researchers later measured the strength of its front teeth, they found something odd. The incisors could withstand about 3 times the force the jaw muscles could actually produce. A wild safety margin that told them the teeth weren't just for chewing plants. They were tools and weapons both. The next time a mouse makes you flinch, remember it had an ancestor's cousin that could have looked down at you. Number 9. The croc that hunted dinosaurs. From a plant eater with a crocodile's bite, we go to a hunter that ate the biggest animals of its day. Picture a crocodile. Now stretch it out to the length of a school bus and set it down in a river 80 million years ago, in the age of the dinosaurs. This is Deinosuchus, a name that simply means terror crocodile, and it earned it. Stretching to around 30 feet long, it holds a brutal record, among the most powerful bites ever estimated for any crocodilian. Its teeth tell the whole story. They weren't fine and sharp. They were thick, rounded, banana-sized pegs, built not to slice, but to crush, to shatter bone and armor. And we know exactly what it was crushing, because paleontologists have found the fossilized bones of dinosaurs, including the big duck-billed hadrosaurs, scarred with Deinosuchus bite marks. This was an ambush hunter that lay in the shallows and exploded upward to drag full-grown dinosaurs down into the water, the same way a modern crocodile takes a wildebeest, except the prey here was a dinosaur. Now, in the interest of being straight with you, the exact bite force is a reconstruction, and the estimates cover a wide range, because we're working from fossils, not a living animal in a lab. Early guesses even had this thing at 50 feet long, before more careful work trimmed it down. But every serious estimate lands in the same territory, a bite in the same league as, or beyond, anything alive today. What's stranger still is that Deinosuchus wasn't really a crocodile in the strict sense. It was an alligatoroid, closer to today's alligators, and it was spread astonishingly wide, with fossils found in more than 10 U.S. states and into Mexico, patrolling the coastlines on both sides of the great inland sea that once split North America in two. Its back was armored with thick bony plates, and studies of its growth suggest it could live around 50 years, spending decades getting slowly, relentlessly bigger. Its size, like so many record holders, has been argued down over time. The oldest reconstructions imagine something close to 50 feet, a figure later work cut roughly in half. One researcher even proposed that there were two kinds, a smaller eastern form around 8 meters and a larger western one that pushed past 10. Whatever the exact number, it dwarfed any crocodile or alligator alive today, and it did something none of them managed. It made the dinosaurs prey. Those blunt, rounded back teeth point to a particular favorite food: turtles. The Cretaceous coasts were thick with big, armored sea turtles, and Deinosuchus had the one tool that could crack them like walnuts. The bite marks it left behind, gouged into turtle shells and dinosaur bones alike, are some of our clearest evidence of how any ancient predator actually fed. It is the terror croc's work, preserved in the scars on its victims. Deinosuchus was the rare predator that could turn the tables on the dinosaurs themselves, and it did it from the water, where they never saw it coming. Number 8. The penguin that looked you in the eye. Time to trade terror for something a little more delightful and a lot more dignified. Everything you feel about penguins is built on the idea that they are small, knee-high, waddling, adorably beneath us. So hold this image in your mind instead. Around 35 million years ago, on the shores of Antarctica, there walked a penguin that stood roughly 2 meters tall. That's about 6.5 feet. If you met it on a beach, it would not waddle around your ankles. It would look you levelly in the eye. Its name is Palaeudiptes, often just called the Colossus penguin, and no penguin, before or since, has stood taller. The emperor penguin, the giant of the modern world, tops out around 4 feet. This animal towered more than 2 feet above that. Scientists worked out its height from an unusually complete set of fossil bones, including a wing bone and an ankle bone longer than in any other penguin, living or extinct. A creature this size could likely have held its breath and hunted underwater far longer than any penguin today, cruising the cold Antarctic seas as a serious marine predator. We know its height so precisely because of a rare stroke of luck. Most fossil penguins are known from scraps, but this one turned up on Antarctica's Seymour Island as an unusually rich haul of bones, including a wing bone and a foot bone longer than in any penguin ever measured. When a 2014 study ran the numbers, it nearly doubled the previous size estimate for the species, and the Colossus penguin was born. And it was no one-off freak. Giant penguins evolved again and again in the tens of millions of years after the dinosaurs died, several different lineages independently ballooning to enormous sizes across the southern hemisphere. For a long stretch of history, penguins the size of people were simply a normal part of the world. Then the biggest ones disappeared. And one popular idea is that as seals and toothed whales spread through the southern oceans, the towering penguins lost out, competing for the same fish and the same waters against sleek new mammal rivals. It's worth pausing on just how far above a modern penguin this was. The emperor, the tallest species alive, would have come up only to about the Colossus penguin's chest, and the sheer length of those leg and wing bones hints at an animal that could dive deeper and stay down longer than anything of its kind today. It was a formidable underwater hunter, cruising a cold sea around an Antarctica that was, back then, far greener and milder than the frozen desert we know now. There is something wonderful about this one, rather than terrifying. It is not a monster. It is just a familiar, beloved, slightly comical animal, quietly scaled up until it could stare down a human being. Evolution built a penguin the size of a person, and then, for reasons we still don't fully understand, let the design go. The giant penguins vanished and left the little ones to inherit the ice. Number 7. The record that keeps shrinking. This next one holds a record too, but its story is a lesson in how science corrects itself. Go back nearly 500 million years, long before anything walked on land, to the oceans of the Ordovician. The top predator of that ancient sea was not a fish. It was a mollusk. A cousin of today's squid and octopus, called Camarasaurus, that lived inside a long, straight, cone-shaped shell and jetted through the water with a crown of tentacles trailing from the wide end. This was the apex hunter of its world, snatching up early sea creatures with those arms and pulling them back to a hidden beak. For its time, it was a genuine sea monster, the largest predator on the planet. Here is where it gets interesting and honest. For a long time, popular books gave this animal a shell up to 9, even 11 meters long, which would make it one of the biggest shelled creatures of all time. But those numbers came from fragments and from a messy habit of dumping every giant fossil shell into the same name. As scientists went back and looked carefully, the record kept shrinking. The best supported estimates today are far more modest, though still large for its era. The giant of the textbooks got quietly smaller with every careful study. The confusion has a specific and slightly comic cause. For over a century, Camarasaurus was treated as a kind of scientific junk drawer. Whenever anyone found a big, straight-shelled fossil from the right time, they tended to file it under this one name, whether it truly belonged there or not. Giant shells that actually belonged to related animals, like the similar orthocone Endoceras, got mixed into the pile, and the reported maximum size ballooned along with the confusion. Untangling which fossil belonged to which animal has taken generations, and it is still not fully resolved. What is not in doubt is the kind of creature it was. Only the hard shell fossilizes, so the soft body, the tentacles, the eyes, the beak, is reconstructed from its living cousins, the nautilus and the squid. In the largest species, that cone-shaped shell could make up most of the animal's total length. It had simple, primitive eyes, and it jetted through the water by pushing a stream of it out through a funnel, drifting backward through the gloom like a living harpoon, dragging its meal back toward the beak hidden among its arms. And remember the stage this played out on. In the Ordovician, life had barely touched dry land. The continents were bare rock, and the action was all in the sea. The water teemed with trilobites scuttling across the floor, with early jawless fish, with sea scorpions, and with the ancestors of today's shellfish. Into that world, Camarasaurus was the closest thing to a great white shark, a fast, straight-shelled hunter at the very top of the food chain, in an age tens of millions of years before the first fish would drag itself onto the shore. It ruled until the great extinction at the end of the Ordovician swept its world away. And that is worth sitting with, because it is how the science actually works. Camarasaurus was still the undisputed emperor of the Ordovician seas, a straight-shelled titan in a world with no competition. It just wasn't quite the 11-meter Leviathan of the old illustrations. The record stands. The legend around it got trimmed down to the truth. Number 6. The greatest ape, known from almost nothing. From a creature we made too big, to one we can barely measure at all. This one holds a title that hits close to home, because it's ours. Gigantopithecus was the largest ape that has ever existed, a real King Kong that lived in the forests of southern China until only a few 100,000 years ago, which means our own ancestors almost certainly knew it. A distant relative of the modern orangutan, it lived on a diet of bamboo and fruit in the deep woods. But here is the strange and slightly humbling part. We have almost none of it. For an animal this famous, this iconic, we have never found a complete skeleton. What we have is teeth. Teeth and a few jawbones. That's essentially it. The very first evidence of it was spotted in the 1930s, not in the ground, but in a Chinese pharmacy, where enormous fossil molars were being sold as dragon bones for medicine. Everything you have ever heard about its size, the classic claim that it stood 10 feet tall and weighed half a ton, is an extrapolation, a scaling up from those giant teeth and jaws. Start with the pharmacy, because the discovery story is almost unbelievable. In the 1930s, a German scientist was picking through bins of so-called dragon bones in a traditional apothecary shop. Fossil teeth and bones ground up for medicine. When he found a single molar so enormous, it clearly belonged to some unknown giant ape. That one tooth, bought over a counter, was the entire introduction of Gigantopithecus to science. Almost everything we know still traces back to teeth like that one, plus a handful of massive lower jaws. Those teeth do tell us real things. Their shape and the microscopic scratches on them say this was a plant eater, grinding through huge quantities of bamboo and fruit. Chemical analysis of the tooth enamel has even tied it firmly to the modern orangutan's branch of the family. Crucially, it survived until only a few 100,000 years ago, which means it overlapped in time and place with early humans, our relative Homo erectus, who would have shared those same forests. Recent work suggests it finally died out as the climate shifted and its dense forests broke apart, a giant too specialized on bamboo to follow the world as it changed. Sit with the overlap in time because it's haunting. Gigantopithecus held on until somewhere around 300,000 years ago, which means that for a stretch of perhaps 500,000 years, giant apes and early humans walked the same forests of Asia at the same time. Our own ancestors would have known this animal, watched it move through the bamboo, learned to give it room. Its teeth show heavy wear from a tough, fibrous, bamboo-heavy diet, and that specialization may have been its doom. When the climate shifted and the forests it depended on thinned and fragmented, a 300-kilogram body with a narrow menu had nowhere to go. The most flexible apes, the small, clever ones that could eat anything, walked out of that changing world. The biggest ape that ever lived did not, and recent researchers are openly cautious about it. Some now suspect the popular 10-foot figure is an overestimate, and that we simply cannot pin the number down without more of the skeleton. So here is the honest record. The largest ape we know of, beyond any doubt, and yet an animal whose true size is still a genuine mystery, reconstructed almost entirely from its own enormous smile. It may even be the seed of a legend. More than one person has wondered whether the stories of Bigfoot and the Yeti are a faint memory of the real giant ape that once shared the forest with us. Number 5. The oldest flyer that flew blind. Now a record that isn't about size at all. It's about being first. 1 in every 5 species of mammal alive today is a bat. They are one of evolution's great success stories, and their signature trick is echolocation, firing out pulses of sound and reading the echoes to paint a picture of the dark. For a long time, we assumed that flight and echolocation evolved together, 2 halves of the same package. Then, in a quarry in Wyoming, we found the animal that proved us wrong. It's called Onychonycteris, and at 52 million years old, it's one of the oldest bats ever found as a complete skeleton. It had wings. It could clearly fly. But when scientists examined its skull, a crucial piece was missing. It lacked the specialized inner ear structure that every echolocating bat alive today relies on. This little animal was flapping through the Eocene forests, fully able to fly, and yet, as far as we can tell, flying blind to sound, with no sonar at all. It settles a long debate in one fossil. Flight came first. The sonar came later. To feel why this fossil matters, you have to appreciate what a strange bargain being a bat is. Powered flight is one of the hardest things a body can do, evolved only a handful of times in the history of animals. Echolocation, seeing the world in returning echoes, is nearly as extraordinary. Bats do both at once, and the deep question was always which came first, or whether they had to arrive together as a package. This one fossil, pulled from the stone of an ancient Wyoming lakebed, answered it. The lake that preserved it was a place of astonishing fossils, and here's the detail that seals the story. In the very same rock, scientists also find another early bat that already had the inner ear of an echolocator. So two kinds of bat shared that Eocene world. One that could navigate by sound, and this older-looking one that, as far as its skull can tell us, could not. It flew on well-formed wings while feeling its way by sight and touch alone. An animal frozen exactly in the gap between gliding ancestor and modern sonar hunter. There's a lovely wrinkle in how it flew, too. Its wings were fully formed, but its body still carried the marks of its tree-climbing past, including claws on all 5 fingers, where a modern bat keeps a claw on just 1 or 2. When researchers modeled its flight, some concluded it may have alternated between flapping and gliding, a halfway style of flying that fits an animal caught between worlds. Bats today make up a full fifth of all mammal species on Earth, thousands of kinds, almost all of them navigating the night by sonar. And here, at the root of that entire dynasty, is a small clawed creature that could already fly and could not yet hear its way through the dark. It kept its claws, too, 1 on every finger, a holdover from climbing ancestors that modern bats have mostly lost. Now, science being science, a later study did argue that a few features of its skull might hint at some echolocation after all, so the case isn't slammed completely shut. But the leading story this fossil tells is a beautiful one. Before bats learned to see with sound, one of them was already in the air, feeling its way through the dark on wings alone. Number 4. The scorpion the size of a dog's leash. Fair warning, if scorpions unsettle you, this is the entry to brace for. Reach back to the Carboniferous, around 330 million years ago, to a world of steaming coal swamps and towering fern forests. The air itself was different then. Thick, with a far higher concentration of oxygen than we breathe today. And that extra oxygen let a certain kind of animal do something monstrous. It let the arthropods, the group that includes insects, spiders, and scorpions, grow to sizes that should be impossible. This was the age of monster bugs, and one of its champions was a scorpion called Pulmonoscorpius. It stretched around 70 centimeters long, a scorpion nearly the length of your leg, close to a full meter, moving across the forest floor of ancient Scotland. Few scorpions in the planet's history have grown anywhere near this large. It was an active hunter with big forward eyes, stalking the oversized insects and small early vertebrates of its world. There is no venom preserved in a fossil, but a modern scorpion that size is a genuinely horrifying thought. And this one was real. The reason a scorpion could ever get this big comes down to a single number: oxygen. In the Carboniferous, the air held far more of it than it does now, perhaps a third of the atmosphere against today's 1/5. That matters enormously for creatures like this, because insects and their relatives don't breathe with lungs the way we do. They take in air passively through tiny tubes and simple book lungs, a system that works beautifully at small sizes and fails as an animal grows. Flood the atmosphere with extra oxygen, though, and suddenly that primitive plumbing can supply a much larger body. The result was an age of giants. Pulmonoscorpius did not rule that world alone. It shared those coal swamps with other nightmares grown to impossible scale. A millipede relative longer than a human called Arthropleura, and Meganeura, a dragonfly with the wingspan of a hawk. It was an entire ecosystem of oversized arthropods, a brief, breathless window when the small things inherited the size of the large. This giant scorpion, with its forward-facing eyes and its heavy claws, was a top hunter of that lost, oxygen-rich world. The clues in its body say it was no burrower hiding under a rock. It had large, forward-facing eyes and a build made for moving in the open, which marks it as an active hunter prowling the floor of the coal forest in daylight, running down the oversized insects and small, early four-limbed animals that shared its world. Its fossils come from a famous site in Scotland that captured a whole slice of this lost swamp. And its fate was sealed not by any predator, but by the air itself. When the great forests declined and oxygen levels fell back toward modern values, the passive plumbing that let arthropods grow this large could no longer keep up, and these outsized hunters shrank away. A scorpion the size of a house cat became permanently a thing of the past. What makes it more than just a cheap scare is what it represents. Pulmonoscorpius is a window into a lost chapter of Earth's history, when the very chemistry of the atmosphere allowed nightmares to grow this large. When the oxygen levels eventually dropped, the giant arthropods shrank, and animals like this became impossible, forever. It is a monster, yes, but it is also a fossil of the air itself, a record of a planet that could build things it can no longer sustain. Number 3. The frog from hell. Some record holders are terrifying because they're huge. This one is terrifying because of what it is. We do not, as a rule, fear frogs. A frog is a small, soft, harmless thing that eats flies by a pond. Now throw that out, because 70 million years ago, on the island of Madagascar, there lived a frog the size of a beach ball. Its scientific name is Beelzebufo, which translates, roughly and gloriously, to the devil toad. No frog we know of, living or extinct, ever grew bigger, and it was built like a living catcher's mitt lined with teeth. This was no flycatcher. Beelzebufo was a squat, wide-mouthed ambush predator, a close relative of the modern horned frogs, the ones nicknamed Pac-Man frogs for their ability to swallow prey nearly their own size. Scientists tested the bite of those living relatives and scaled the numbers up, and the result was staggering. A bite force estimated in the range of a lion's. A bite like that on a frog that size opens up a genuinely unsettling menu. Researchers concluded it could have taken small crocodiles, and since it shared its world with dinosaurs, the hatchlings and juveniles of the dinosaurs living alongside it. Everything about this animal is built around that mouth. Its name says it too. The second half, ampinga, refers to armor, a nod to the bony, shield-like plates in its skull, so the full name reads as something like armored devil toad. It was squat and heavy, perhaps 10 pounds or more, heavier than the largest frog alive today. It hunted the way its living relatives do, sitting motionless and nearly invisible, then lunging with a mouth that seems far too big for its body when something edible strays within range. The link to those living relatives is also a genuine scientific puzzle. Beelzebufo's closest kin, the horned frogs, live today in South America, an ocean away from Madagascar, where the fossil was found. Those two lands were joined once, long ago, in the supercontinent that predated the dinosaurs' final act. And how the family ended up split across that gap, whether by ancient land bridges or by evolving the same body plan twice over, is still debated. What's clear is the outcome. On the island of Madagascar, right at the twilight of the dinosaurs, evolution built the biggest, angriest frog the world had ever seen, and armed it with a bite that punched far above an amphibian's weight. Set it beside a living giant to feel the scale. The largest frog alive today, the Goliath frog of West Africa, is already unnervingly big, the size of a house cat. Beelzebufo appears to have outweighed even that, a squat, armored boulder of an amphibian crouched in the leaf litter of Cretaceous Madagascar. Its whole hunting strategy was patience and a catastrophic mouth. It didn't chase, it waited, camouflaged and still, until a lizard or a small crocodile or an unlucky young dinosaur wandered close, and then a mouth nearly as wide as its body snapped shut with the force of a big cat's bite. On an island where the animals evolved in strange isolation, the humble frog had been quietly promoted into a genuine predator. Now, to be fair, the frog that ate baby dinosaurs is a headline, and the scientists themselves are careful. They say it was capable of such a bite, not that we have caught it in the act. But even the careful version is remarkable. On an island at the very end of the age of dinosaurs, a frog had grown big enough and strong enough that a young dinosaur was not off the menu. The pond, for once, was the dangerous place to be. Number 2. The 2-ton wombat. We are down to the giants now, and this one is my favorite kind of strange. Enormous, and yet somehow gentle and absurd. Australia has always run its own separate experiment in evolution, and during the last ice age, that experiment produced this. Diprotodon. Imagine the sweet, dumpy, burrowing wombat you know, a solid little animal the size of a bulldog. Now inflate it to the size of a hippopotamus. That is Diprotodon, and it holds the record as the largest marsupial in the entire history of the pouched mammals. It stood around 6 feet tall at the shoulder, stretched over 10 feet from nose to tail, and weighed nearly 3 tons. 3 tons of wombat, browsing across the Australian plains in herds, plucking leaves and shrubs with a huge blunt head. Being a marsupial, a female almost certainly carried her young in a pouch, which means there was once a pouch on this planet big enough to hold a human toddler. It shared its world with other outsized Australian oddities, towering short-faced kangaroos and a marsupial lion, and it was hunted by them, and eventually by the first people to reach the continent. This was the very first fossil mammal ever named from Australia back in 1838, and it baffled the scientists who received the bones. They had never seen anything like it, and their first guesses reached for the familiar. Maybe a rhinoceros, maybe a hippo, maybe some kind of elephant. At one point, they filed it in with the elephant relatives, until someone pointed out that the teeth were unmistakably a marsupial's. A pouched animal simply wasn't supposed to be this big. The best window into its life comes from a dry salt lake called Calabana, which in the Ice Age was a deadly trap. Herds came to drink at the shrinking water, sank into the treacherous mud, and died where they stood. And today, the site holds the remains of hundreds of Diprotodon, one of the richest megafauna graveyards on the continent. From bones like these, we know the males dwarfed the females, and that they browsed in loose groups. We know, too, what stalked them. Thylaccoleo, the marsupial lion, a pouched predator with bolt-cutter teeth and a bite built for killing animals larger than itself. There's a tender detail hidden in all that bulk. Because it was a marsupial, and specifically a relative of the wombat, its pouch almost certainly opened toward the rear, the way a wombat's does to keep dirt out while digging, which means a mother Diprotodon carried her single enormous joey in a backward-facing pocket big enough to hold a human child. Imagine it, a 3-ton animal moving across the plain with a toddler-sized baby riding in a pouch behind her. Its disappearance is one of the great unsolved arguments of the Ice Age. Diprotodon vanished around the time the first people reached Australia, and ever since, scientists have split over the cause. Was it the drying, harshening climate of the late Ice Age? Was it human hunting and the fires people brought? Was it both at once? A slow squeeze from 2 directions. The biggest pouched animal that ever lived left the stage without telling us why. And that is where its story turns quiet. Diprotodon vanished around 40-odd thousand years ago, along with nearly every other large animal in Australia, in an extinction that still fuels a hard debate between climate and human hunting. But for a couple of million years, the biggest pouched animal in the history of the world was, essentially, a rhinoceros-sized wombat. Evolution has a sense of humor. It just plays the joke very, very large. Number 1. The largest creature ever to walk the earth. We end at the ceiling. The literal upper limit of how big a land mammal can be. Every animal on this list held a record, but this one holds the biggest of them all. 23 million years ago, across the dry woodlands of Asia, there moved a creature so large it makes an elephant look ordinary. It was called Paraceratherium, and it was a rhinoceros. Not the squat, armored, horned rhino you're picturing, but a hornless one, with long, pillar-like legs and a towering neck like a giraffe's, reaching up to strip the leaves from the crowns of trees. It is the largest land mammal that has ever existed. The numbers are hard to even hold in your head. It stood around 16 feet tall at the shoulder, before you even count the neck and head reaching up above that. It weighed in the neighborhood of 17 tons. That is the weight of roughly 4 full-grown African elephants standing in one animal. A human being would not reach its knee. It was so large that fully grown adults had essentially no predators at all. Nothing in its world was big enough to bring one down, though the young had to fear enormous crocodiles at the water's edge. The first pieces of it came out of the ground in what is now Pakistan in the early years of the 20th century. A scatter of teeth and jaw fragments that gave almost no hint of the scale of the animal they belonged to. It took decades of further finds across Asia, from China to the Balkans, to assemble a picture of the whole. Even now, no single complete skeleton exists. The giant is a composite, built from the bones of many individuals, which is part of why its exact size is still being refined. Everything about its build was tuned for reaching high. The legs were long and column-like, holding the body well off the ground. The neck stretched upward like a giraffe's. The skull, set at the top of all that, carried a nose that may have supported a short, muscular, grasping lip or small trunk, like a tapir's, for pulling leaves off the highest branches. This was an animal that fed where nothing else could reach, stripping the crowns of trees across the dry woodlands of Oligocene Asia, moving in small family groups through a landscape it towered over completely. To grasp 17 tons, try to picture it in familiar terms. It is about the weight of 4 adult African elephants fused into a single animal, or a fully loaded city bus with people to spare. An adult stood so far above the ground that a human being would have struggled to touch its elbow, let alone its shoulder. At that scale, the ordinary dangers of the world simply fell away. No predator alive could threaten a healthy adult. The only real risk came at the water's edge, where giant crocodiles could ambush the young. Its very existence brushes up against a hard physical rule. Bone and muscle can only support so much before the math of being big turns against you. And scientists have long proposed that somewhere around 20 tons lies the absolute ceiling for any animal that has to stand and walk on legs. Paraceratherium sits right up against that wall. That's the honest reason this record is so unlikely ever to fall. It isn't just that nothing has beaten it yet. It's that the laws of physics may not allow a land animal to get much bigger at all. Scientists think it may have sat right at the physical ceiling for life on land, near the absolute maximum weight a legged animal can carry before bone and muscle simply cannot cope. There is an honest asterisk here, because a giant prehistoric elephant may have rivaled it for the crown, and the estimates are close. But whether it was the champion or the runner-up by a whisker, the point stands. This hornless rhino, browsing the treetops of ancient Asia, pushed against the outer limit of how big a warm-blooded animal can get and still walk. It is about as large as a land animal has ever managed to be. Finale. 10 animals, 10 records. Not one of them the same. The heaviest rodent and the tallest penguin. The strongest bite in the ancient rivers and the oldest wings in the ancient skies. The largest scorpion, the largest frog, the largest ape, the largest marsupial, and, standing over all of them, the largest land mammal that the planet has ever built. There is a quiet idea hiding in a list like this. We tend to think of the animals around us today as the finished product, the winners, the way things are supposed to be. But every record here was set by something that is now gone. The rules of what is possible were written, and then broken, and then written again, over and over, across hundreds of millions of years, by creatures that no human eye ever saw. The world you know, the ordinary rat and the knee-high penguin and the palm-sized frog, is just the current draft. The record book is far older and far stranger than we are. And notice how many of these champions we got wrong at first. We drew Camarasaurus too large and the terror croc too long. We built a 10-foot ape out of a single tooth. We assumed a bat could not fly without sonar and that a marsupial could never grow to the size of a hippo. Every one of these records came with a story of scientists arguing, revising, and slowly closing in on the truth, and several of those arguments are still going. So the next time someone tells you they know how big an animal can get, or how small, or how strange, remember that the Earth has been quietly setting and breaking these records since long before we arrived, and it is almost certainly not finished yet. Until next time.